Alright everyone, hello and welcome back to Fixing Focus. This is episode 2 of the series where you and I are taking this 2008 Ford Focus SES and making it the best possible version of itself, with the ultimate goal of having a stock plus vehicle. And if you're unfamiliar with the term stock plus, well, here's a great example. Look at the rear end lighting. In the previous episode, aka the first episode, link down below by the way, we did a full rear LED conversion, including these awesome eBay special lights that actually look amazing. They add a whole new level of depth and character to this car. They make it look a little bit newer, a little bit more expensive, and just a little bit nicer, but they still totally fit with the car. They don't look ridiculous or aftermarket. And it's the same story up front, where we did new headlights and fog lights. And with these headlights, we did LED turn signals slash DRLs that look a little bit brighter and look a little bit better, but still look kind of totally stock and regular and normal, which is the whole goal of this series. And by the end of it, we're going to have an awesome little car. But now that she looks great from that first episode, it's now time to make her drive great. Which is why I have this box of front-end suspension components. Let's take a look at what we got. And here it is. We've got quite a few components. Lower control arms, tie rod ends, sway bar end links, and lug nuts. And the question I'm sure you all have is why we're replacing so many components. And the answer is quite simple. This Focus has over 216,000 miles. And to the best of my knowledge, everything up front is completely original. That means original sway bar end links, tie rod ends, ball joints, and of course those lug nuts, which we'll talk about in just a second. But because of that, it's kind of a miracle that this car still drives. I mean, not really, it's not going to fall apart, hopefully. But there's kind of a good bit of noise coming from the front end, and it's just definitely time to replace these components, especially those sway bar end links. They are known to fail on these cars as soon as 50,000 miles. So we're like 4 times past that, plus a little decimal at the end of it. But basically, it's time to do all of this. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of work, but hopefully it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to have a lot of improvement on the way the Focus drives. Plus, with a 1,000-mile road trip in my near future, it's definitely the best time to get this done. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. And get right into it we shall. But first, just a quick disclaimer. I want you all to remember that I am 18 years old and that this Focus is my first car. I'm just someone who's excited to work on this car, and everything that I know from YouTube tutorials and a bit of common sense. And I'm saying this because I might do things in a way that's totally improper and not even realize it, or realize it and I'm just hoping for good results. So with that in mind, if you're watching this episode or any of the Fixing Focus videos because you're trying to do exactly what I'm doing, just take it all with at least a pinch of salt, because these videos are less kind of educational and more just of a documentary of what I've been doing on the car. And with that out of the way, let's actually get right into it. And we're going to start with what I like to call Big Bertha. This is a 1/2-inch drive breaker bar, and it should be everything we need to get these lug nuts off of the wheels. I'm just hoping that they don't break, because I do believe that on this side of the car, a couple of them, we're going to have to resort to destructive measures to get them off. And with that in mind, let's actually talk about why I'm replacing all of the lug nuts. And here is why. This is one of the new lug nuts I got. It's 19 millimeters acorn seat style, I believe they call it, or acorn bulge seat, I don't really know. But as you can see, it fits perfectly into my 19 millimeter socket. Doesn't go in the 18, it fits really loose in the 20, which means it's the right size. But the lug nuts on the car are also this exact style, 19 millimeter bulge seat acorn, whatever they call it. And the issue there is that those will not fit comfortably into the 19 millimeter socket. They actually fit better in the 20 millimeter. And that's because Ford, in a genius cost-cutting measure, made a double layer design for the lug nuts. which basically means that there's a strong inner core of the lug nut, usually made out of like steel or some other cheap but strong metal. And then on the outside, there's some cheaper metal like zinc or chromium or whatever that looks good so that the lug nuts look nice, but also so that they're strong. So strong on the inside, weak on the outside, but they still look good and they're cheaper to produce than making pure stainless steel ones like I believe the ones that I bought are. Now, the only issue with this method of manufacture is that over time, water, dirt, debris, and stuff gets in there between the layers, and it can cause rust and other buildup of damage. And eventually they swell and they get really difficult to remove. And basically, you might have to resort to destructive measures to get them off. I'm hoping I won't have to do that today, but we probably will for at least a couple of the lug nuts. But we'll see. Let's just go ahead and get started with taking them off. I'm not going to just try and remove the wheel while the car is on the ground, but I am going to use the weight of the car as well as the parking brake, which should always be engaged when doing any work like this. But I'm going to use the weight of the car to basically allow me to turn these and loosen them. Now, I'm not going to try to do this while holding the camera, so you'll just have to trust me that I'm not using any power tools or anything. But I have this seated fully on the lug nut as much as possible because I did learn that if it's kind of not seated all the way and fully and properly, you can actually have an issue where that you cause that layer to separate. So the more on it you can get the lug on the lug nut or the socket on the lug nut, the better chance you have of not messing them up. But now I'm going to go ahead and loosen these lug nuts on both sides of the car, and we'll go from there. Alright, so I'm almost done here getting off all of the lug nuts, or loosening them, not taking them off, just loosening them, breaking them free. And you'll notice, if you ever do this, that the lug nuts get stuck inside the socket. And yeah, I do have a lug nut off, I'm just doing it one at a time. But the way I'm doing this, or getting them out, is I put this small ratchet inside of here, and then I have it like this, and I basically just bang the lug nut out. And when all else fails, if the lug nut is really stuck in there like it was here, and this lug nut is definitely destroyed now, set it on the ground, and I used that breaker bar and just smacked it right out of there. You gotta do what you gotta do. Alright, so you can probably see that earlier when I was talking about having to resort to destructive methods, I have had to resort to those destructive methods. Like I said before, the caps on these lug nuts have a habit of coming detached and just getting stuff in them, which makes it tremendously difficult to actually get the lug nut off. So after beating it with a screwdriver and using a hatchet as a hammer, we finally got the lug nut cap off. So I'm just going to toss that over there. And now I can get the lug nut loosened off. And now, with both sides of the car jacked up, with the wheels just off of the ground on either side, it's now time to take the wheels off, take off all the old parts, and put all the new ones on. Alright, so it's been about an hour since the last clip. You can see I've sprayed every nut and bolt with penetrating fluid, aka off-brand WD-40. That way, even though there's very little rust here, any rust and corrosion will hopefully be taken care of by the time I get to that part. And we're going to start with the sway bar end links. You can see it here. It is a long old thing, 10 inches. And here is the new one from Rock Auto. It's a Delphi Technologies model, and it looks totally identical. It's even got the same like casting and ridging on it. So I am very excited about that. But now it's time to take an 18 millimeter on the back, which would be on this nut right here, and then a 15 millimeter right here to get these things out of here. All right, status update. Here's the current setup. I've gotten the first part of the end link removed, ready to go. Just put that back in there for now. And now I'm working on the other end, which as you can see is inverted and pretty difficult to get to. I really should be using just another wrench instead of that socket. But I'm lucky enough that my 3/8 inch drive socket is just small enough to kind of fit in this area and turn a little bit. But you can see I've got the wrench on the back side of that nut, or of that stud on a nut, which keeps the stud from spinning while I wrench it off. And with that, here is a 216,000 mile sway bar end link. And this thing is absolutely worn out. It's surprisingly got a really nice feel to it. There's no grit or anything in there, but look how easily I can move this. It's definitely time to replace. And with that, we can go ahead and install the new sway bar end link again. Here it is. And I'm just gonna slot it in here and do the reverse procedure. And once we do that, we'll move on to the tie rod ends. All right, and now we're doing the tie rod ends. And here's a quick thing to note. So first of all, this bolt is 21, or nut is 21 millimeters. Just keep that in mind. You're gonna need a pretty significant wrench. And when you're turning this, yes, this is counterclockwise and that will loosen it, but you've got to be thinking from the perspective of the nut. So actually, you'll be turning it this way to loosen it. And yeah, that's power steering fluid. That's going to be something else we have to deal with. But for now, I just fill it up a little bit and try not to think about it. But anyways, once I get this tie rod end off, and I believe this is 15 millimeters, you just undo that. I'll show you the rest of the way. Now, as for moving the tie rod, everyone's got their own preferred hacks and tips and tricks. I just took my breaker bar and I beat right there on the top of it, which, just like a pickle fork, is probably going to damage the tie rod beyond repair, but I'm replacing them, so I'm not really worried about damaging it. Plus, this one is absolutely worn out and well in need of replacement. So, to get it off, we're just going to spin, and a lot of people say, oh, you got to count the rotations and blah, 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 and I probably should, but because I'm leaving that nut right there, all I got to do is turn the tie rod as many times as it takes to get back right there. So now it's time to put the new one on. And now with that tie rod end off, you can see a bit of a difference between the new and the old. For example, like how easy I can move that one versus this one, which has no play in it whatsoever. Now, quick thing to note, depending on which tie rod ends you get if you do this project, take a look. On the stock tie rod end, it says L for left. We're on the driver's side of the vehicle, so we're on the left side. But on the new one, there's no marking or any indication like that I can see. So since I'm doing both of them, I have 2 boxes and 2 new parts. So just make sure that when you're doing this, that you match up the parts and make sure they look identical. That way you don't have to worry about the marking. You just know that you can match up the old one with the new one, and you can put it on. Alright, so I've gotten the new driver's side tie rod end installed. It looks great, and a quick note about the old one, it actually didn't look too bad. I mean, obviously it had a lot of play and it was definitely worn out, but it wasn't quite as bad as I expected, especially in terms of like the condition of the boot. You know, the boot didn't look too damaged or compromised, especially the way the sway bar end links looked. But anyways, we have it installed now, and just about the rotations and stuff, just leave the nut right here, because the part and thread pitch are going to be identical, or else they won't fit, obviously. So leave the nut exactly where it was when the old tie rod end was on. That way, your alignment can be, hopefully, alright. Now, I probably could have undone this nut and given a half or a full rotation in the opposite direction, because actually my alignment is such that this wheel is actually pointed that way a little bit, so I could have actually done a little bit of correction on my own. But I really don't want to try to mess with anything that I don't have to. And I'm just going to take it to an alignment shop and have it dealt with there anyways. But now, I wanted to mention that I had my steering wheel turned, so when I was putting the new one on, it was kind of right here, and the knuckle was here. I was like, oh my god, how do I get this out? Well, I just turned the wheel and made it go with the tie rod end, and then I wasn't able to show with the camera, but I just kind of had to hold this in while I was holding that and kind of bolt it on. And again, that is 21 millimeters, this is 15 millimeters, and as far as the tightness goes, you can do the torque spec. It's like 35 and 37 foot-pounds, I believe, or maybe 35 for both. But I just kind of remembered, oh, this one was on relatively tight with my hand, so I just hand tightened it back up, and this one was hand tightened, and you can see I can't really tighten it anymore without putting in a lot of effort, and putting in a lot of effort would definitely be too tight and would possibly strip the threads. And now it's time to do the part that I'm kind of dreading, which is this lower control arm, just because there's so much to remove, but I think we can get it done. So, let's get it done. And now, moving on from the tie rod ends and sway bar end links, you'd think that we'd go to the lower control arms. And indeed, on the driver's side, I've already installed the lower control arm. Well, I did, and then I drove 60 miles to my college, and when I pulled into a parking garage, it fell out of the wheel and caused this damage. Plus, it split the CV axle boot in half, so now I have to replace that, and that part should be here in actually just a few minutes. But I realized that all of the recording I had done for that control arm was just kind of bogus now because of I did do it incorrectly, and I do know what I did wrong. So now I'm going to show you how to replace the lower control arm properly, as close as one can get with hand tools and a lack of a shop and 80-degree Texas heat. And now it's time to commence with the actual removal of the lower control arm. Again, there are our beautiful new sway bar end link and tie rod end. And to remove this lower control arm, it's a pretty simple procedure, at least starting with removing the ball joint. So I have a T50 Torx bit on this end here where the brake calipers are. And you can see I'm holding it with an 8mm wrench because unfortunately I do not have any tools actually small enough to go in between this gap to actually hold that with another socket. But this works just fine. It's a bit of a little wrench, but it gets the job done. And then on this side, we have a 15mm socket. There we go, focused. We've got a 15mm socket on that 15mm bolt, and we're going to use this to actually loosen that bolt, which will allow us to remove this lower ball joint. Let's get to it. All right, and now to get this bolt out down there, all you need to do is take some sort of punch and kind of punch it out. I am actually using the end of my breaker bar right here, and I'm just kind of tapping it in. And as long as you don't have a lot of rust, I mean, I don't have much rust. This car is like rust free. You should just be able to tap it out pretty easily. And if you can, a bit of penetrating fluid is totally good. All right, and real quick, now that I've gotten the lower ball joint actually removed, or at least very close to being removed from the knuckle, everyone has a different way of getting it out. A lot of the professionals will say that you need to use a pickle fork, which is basically like a wrench, but it's tapered towards the end, so it gets pretty flat. And that lets you kind of get in there and kind of basically stick it in and then like hammer it on until this thing pops out. I elect for a more simple and more affordable option, which just involves taking a hammer, or in this case, the end of a hatchet, and just banging on the end of this there, which not only gets the job done, but can also cause hearing damage, but at least it's a lot cheaper. And now we move on to the rest of the process for getting the lower control arm off, which involves taking off that bolt there, plus another behind it, as well as the bolts holding this thing in, which you can see right there and right there. We're going to need I believe a 21mm wrench right there to hold that nut. And then I think this is 18mm on that nut right there. Maybe it's 15 as well. And we're going to turn our socket on that. And we're going to use the wrench over here to hold it so that it doesn't just spin. And we should be able to get this lower control arm right out. But that's just in theory. Let's put it to the test. All right, and now you can see the current setup. We have, well, I used the breaker bar with an 18mm to break that bolt free, and then I just used my ratchet. And now I've got that bolt off, again using this 21mm right there. But as you can see, it's become a little bit stuck, kind of in there, and I don't really feel like reaching in there for it, so I'm just going to take my magnet tool and fish it out. If you don't have one of these magnet tools, they're super affordable. I think this one was like $3 at AutoZone. It's very much worth the investment, even if you only use it once or twice for stuff like that. But now, to continue removing this bolt, it's pretty simple. You'd think it would pull out because there's no more threads over here where that non-captive nut was. But as you can see, with the continued progress I make by twisting it, that's how it's going to come out. But once we have this bolt out of that bushing, we're going to take these 2 bolts out. And they're kind of difficult. You have to get underneath the car. And I'll show you a cool trick I came up with to get that out. But even though it looks kind of difficult and daunting, I promise it's not that bad. All right, and here we are underneath that other bushing. And you can see it's that rubber is cracked and definitely ready to be replaced. And on that note, that's actually kind of the reason I'm replacing the whole lower control arm, instead of just like replacing this lower ball joint. Because not only would I have to drill those rivets out and all that crap, which would require removing the lower control arm anyways, but also that bushing and that bushing are just definitely worn out and need to be replaced. And once I do that, the whole car is going to ride so much better, so much smoother, and I'm definitely ready for that. But as for getting out this bushing, you can see we've got some bolts here. This one is 15, that one is 18. I just used my wrench to validate that. That's why I've got this wrench on here. So I'll take that off. And you're probably wondering what that little hack is that I came up with to hold that other bolt, since it's not captive. How are we going to get it? How are we going to get this piece off? Well, I'm going to take my long breaker bar, and I can't remember what size that bolt is over there. Let me check. Okay, so that is 21 millimeters, just like that bolt over here. So I'm going to use my breaker bar and a 21 millimeter socket to hold it. And I'm going to be underneath with my other socket, wrench, whatever you want to call it, with my 18 millimeters. So 18, 15, 21 are the measurements over here. And I think this one might actually be like some other size, but we'll see. Anyways, I'm going to do all of that. And basically, I'm going to be holding this wrench while I'm underneath, while also turning with the other socket wrench. And that's going to be how we get these bolts off. All right, and with all of the bolts loosened, I wanted to show you guys something real quick. So pretty much every bolt underneath for the lower control arm, actually every single one, has the bolt and a nut. And the way I keep myself from kind of losing these and keeping them organized, I just keep the bolt and the nut together. And that just makes it a little less difficult. That makes it a little more difficult to lose those parts. Now, with the lower control arm, every single bolt taken out, I kind of had to press down on here a little bit to get it fully free of the ball joint, or the ball joint fully free of the knuckle. But now it should be pretty simple to just take it out. And there we go. Now it's time for the new one. All right, and here is the new lower control arm from Moog Rock Auto. This isn't how it was packaged. I've already opened it up and taken a look at everything, and it looks good. Just like the old one. And actually, I've already installed the driver's side control arm, but I had a lot of issues with that, and I wasn't proud of how I recorded it. So we're going to, basically, I'm going to do all of this again with the passenger side. And taking a look at this ball joint, I can barely move it, and that's a good thing, because the other one, surprisingly, the ball joint on the driver's side was really worn out. Like, I could just kind of play with it like that. Versus the ball joint over here, it was actually kind of okay. It had a nice smooth operation to it, and it was a little difficult to move. But this one, definitely the best and what we wanted. Plus, with all of these new bushings, and these are the parts that kind of control when the arm kind of goes up and down. Make sure that's nice and smooth. So this looks good. Definitely ready to go ahead and install it. Okay, so now we have all of the bolts and hardware installed on the interior part of the car for the lower control arm. We just got to get this ball joint into the knuckle here and the wheel assembly. And we're going to start by just kind of lining it up, and it'll pop into place. Alright, so it went into the knuckle. Now I'm going to show you how to actually get it to stay and go in properly, so that you don't run into the same issue I did, where you're driving down the road and it literally comes out and you almost crash, you know. So I'm going to move my towel, and then I'm going to use this bottle jack and press it underneath the ball joint, and then I'm going to use my other jack to lower the weight of the car onto this ball jack, onto the ball joint, which will force it into the knuckle. All right, so let me show you what we got going on. I've got this bottle jack right there, almost touching the bottom of the ball joint. And now I'm going to lower the weight of the car. I'm going to lower the jack stand and lower the jack onto that bottle jack, and it's hopefully going to pop the ball joint right in. All right, so what I'm going to have you guys watch for is right here where my fingertip is. You're going to hopefully see a piece of shiny metal come up through that hole. Let's see if it happens. Almost. Get close. In fact, I'm going to quickly reseat that. Just make sure it goes on properly. All right, try it again. Oh, I heard a sound. And there we go. So you can see it's kind of hard to tell, but you did see that piece of metal go in, which means the ball joint is fully and properly seated. So now it's just a matter of getting the bolts in there and finishing the job. Okay, so I've just been under the car for a minute getting this bolt and that one in there all seated and nice and very hand tight. So now it's time to do the other one. I mean, those are easy. I showed you earlier with the breaker bar and all that, how I had it kind of sticking out of here and I'm underneath the car jacking on it. Oh, but then for this bolt here, that kind of long runner, I've got an 18 millimeter right here. I have my 21 millimeter wrench right there on this other nut. And I'm sitting like this. You can see here how I'm kind of sitting just like on my car tire or the whole wheel. And I'm just going to be sitting right here and wrenching away at this. And that's what I found to be kind of the most comfortable and more effective way, one of the more effective ways to do this without trying to be under the car and dealing with all of that. Because it's kind of difficult to run your hands up through here, so I just found that this is the better way to do it. If you have a better way, leave it in the comments. I'm sure it'll help a lot of people. But now I'm going to do this, and then we're going to move on to the pinch bolt for the ball joint. All right, and it only took a few turns to get that good and tightened down. As you can see, the bolt is going through the nut a good bit. So now it's time to do this pinch bolt for the ball joint knuckle. So it's very important that you get this orientation right. This Torx bit side faces the brake caliper, and then this threaded side goes the other way. So basically you just kind of pop it in to the hole right there, and it should just go right in. If it doesn't go right in, just tap it in a little bit. And mine went right in. So like I showed you before, I'm using an 8mm wrench on this Torx bit since I can't get a whole socket in there to actually use that. And then I'm going to have my, I think it's 15mm. I'm going to have my 15mm on my actual socket wrench, and I'm going to wrench at it like that until it tightens up, and then we'll actually be done, ready to put the wheel on, except for one last thing. And we'll get to that in just a second. And good news, everyone. Oh, not my paint. Don't look at that paint. That's not good news. But what is good news is that we have the wheel installed. I've got to tighten up these lug nuts, but hopefully I lower the car onto the ground and the ball joint doesn't just pop out of place. That would be really annoying. And then we'll be able to take it for a test drive and make sure everything works. And once we confirm that, we get to move on to something else. Alright, so what has been for you a couple of seconds has been, for me, a couple of very busy weeks since school let out. I thought I'd have more time since I got out of school, but it has been the exact opposite. I've been working, I've been playing, I've been doing all sorts of stuff, and now I'm actually going to be moving states. This Saturday, today is Tuesday, so like 5 days or 4, I don't know. But I'm going to be moving states pretty soon. It's a 900-mile drive, and I want to make sure that old Perfect here is in tip-top shape, which means it's time to replace the final component in this second episode of Fixing Focus. That second component, or that final component, is this. It's the driver's side CV axle / drive axle, and the issue with mine is that when I had improperly installed the ball joint the first time, I actually managed to rip the gears out of this, so it all came out. The boot ripped, and it was just a big mess. Luckily, it still works, and they apparently last about 10,000 miles with a ripped boot and no fluid or grease. But it's a really important task to either replace the boot and put more grease in here, or just replace the whole part like I'm doing now. And the reason I'm replacing the whole part, despite the additional cost, which is something we're avidly against here on Fixing Focus, is because replacing it is like all artsy and crafty, and I'm not good at that. I just know how to hammer and wrench, so that's exactly what we're gonna do. Now, you might notice that it's raining out here, and you're probably wondering why I'm working in the rain. Well, not only do I have a carport with a nice light in it, but also today is my only free day. I was actually supposed to go do something today. My plans got canceled because I've been sick and I don't want to get anyone else sick. But tomorrow I have to go back to work, and I'm going to be working until Friday. And that day I'm going to be spending all of it working, getting everything packed for the trip. So today is literally the only day I have to work on getting this replaced. So let's go over pretty much everything you'll need. You'll need automatic transmission fluid for the fluid that's going to come out when you remove that end of the blinds. You're going to need a soft-faced mallet. You're going to need some sort of ratchet, impact socket, wrench, whatever, I don't know. But I have a half-inch drive breaker bar and associated tools, 19 millimeter for the lug nuts on the wheels, as well as a 32 millimeter socket for that nut right there. I also have these screwdrivers to serve as pry bars. I have my socket set for the ball joint. I have that tool, which goes on one end of the ball joint bolt, as well as this hatchet that I'm going to be using as a stronger hammer, and a wrench set. And I'm only using this because I have this little wrench here, which is going to grab this because I don't have anything that fits that. But with that, let's go ahead and get it done. Alright, so with the wheel removed and the car safely jacked up on a jack and jack stand, I've gone ahead and taken the liberty of replacing the fog light bulb that came with those new housings we installed in the previous episode, which, as you can see, the bulbs must have been defective or something, or maybe I touched them during installation, I don't know. But I took care not to touch the bulb, the new bulb, when I installed it, and now both fog light housings have brand new bulbs. They shine bright, they look great, and they'll hopefully last a couple of years. Eventually, I do need to jack the car up and clean out this housing. It got some water in it. I don't know if I installed it incorrectly or what, but it's kind of nasty, so I'm going to take care of that. But first, let's do what we're actually here for, replacing this CV axle. And I'm going to start by breaking free this nut right here. Okay, so good news and bad news. Bad news is, with hand tools, I'm unable to get this nut off. It is not budging, it is not moving. So, for a minute, I was kind of stopped on this project. The good news is that thanks to my grandpa, I've got something that should take this right off. Let's see how well it works. And just like that, we got it removed. I cannot believe that actually came off, because for a second the impact was struggling, but it actually did the job. So, way to go, Black & Decker, the Bulldog Automotive Series. Now it's time to get this axle out of here. So now, to get this axle out, I'm going to use my breaker bar as basically a driver or whatever, and I'm going to use the end of this hatchet and just bang it on until that pops out. Well, actually, I totally forgot. I need to remove the lower ball joint, and you already saw me struggle to do that, so I'll do that real quick, and then I will actually hammer that out. Alright everyone, Philip Thomas here again. You'll have to excuse how tired I look and how messed up my hair is and how loud the noise is from the wind and the cars. It's just the way things are. Anyways, we're at the point now in this episode of Fixing Focus where we are replacing, or attempting to replace, the CV axle, driver's side. God, the driver's side of this car has been through so much. But anyways, we're at this point. I've gotten the axle nut off, and the freaking axle is stuck in the knuckle, or the wheel bearing housing. I don't know what it's called. But what we ended up having to do was call a mechanic to come out, and keep in mind, this guy's been doing this for 15-20 years. He said that removing my CV axle from that knuckle housing, whatever you want to call it, might have been the most difficult one he's ever done. which I guess is an honor for Old Perfect, but it's also like, why? Why would my rust-free car be the one that's so difficult to remove? Like, it was so difficult to remove to the point where we were taking sledgehammers to the thing, mushrooming the crap out of it to the point where it almost even didn't even fit through the splines and the hole that it was in. But we just barely managed to get it out of there. And with that replaced, I actually managed to make the drive here to New Mexico. About 980 miles, including a few destinations I had along the way. And just 200 miles outside of my final destination here, well, let me back up a little bit. So, I got this car July of last year, 2022, 23. Oh, it's crazy to think that it's 2024 still. But I got the car, and there was this very mild sound. It sounded kind of just like plastic grinding. I didn't think too much of it because I thought that it was just going to be, or I thought it was just the plastic from the front bumper grinding and making noise because it was damaged. It had been ripped off by a U-Haul. Funny story about that. But anyways, that's what I thought the noise was. But over the year that I've had this car, the noise has slowly but surely increased in volume and severity. To the point now, or to the point where 200 miles outside of the city, it was so bad that it was actually making the lug nuts vibrate in such a way that they were actually coming loose from the car. I've never seen anything like it, and I'd never seen anything like it until I was driving down the road, down the highway, 80 miles an hour, and all of a sudden, it's this sound like I'm driving over rumble strips. And it was bad. I can't believe the wheel didn't fall off with how loose the lug nuts were. I managed to get the tire off and then put it back on the car and tighten everything down, and it was okay for the 200 miles to my destination. But finally, I took the car to a shop and had the wheel bearing replaced and an alignment done. So the car drives really well and it looks okay. But most importantly, for this second episode, the car is finally in decent enough mechanical condition that I can comfortably take it pretty much anywhere, at any speed, at any time. And that's what's most important from all of this. Now, moving on from this episode, I do want to apologize again for this kind of interjection thing. I'm sorry you guys couldn't see me replace that CV axle or the wheel bearing. Those are just projects that are out of my current capabilities. And eventually maybe I'll have a whole shop or a bunch of tools or something where a project like this isn't completely impossible, or at least very difficult to do without damaging something really severely. But with that, I hope you all aren't left too confused or without information for this second episode of Fixing Focus. And I cannot wait to see you all in episode 3, coming out in hopefully a month or two after this one. It's going to be about some noise, so we're going to talk about that wheel bearing a little bit more. We're going to address the power steering issue, and I'm going to replace my horn that doesn't work. Or it didn't work. That's a whole thing. You'll understand in the next episode. So I thank you all so much for sticking around for this episode. I know it's been a long one, but hey, we're here at the end. And again, thank you so much. And I'll see you around.